Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our continued Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to check us out on social media. You can search at Dogworks Radio, and I'm going to ask you guys for a favor tonight. One of the ways that we get found on the podcast networks is if you leave a review, and you can do that on any podcast network. Please leave us a positive or negative review, whatever you think of our show, and we will be very grateful for that. On Apple, for example, you can go to woofpod.dog, and that will take you right to the Apple app, and you can do a quick review there or anywhere else that you would like to do that. That would be much appreciated. And tonight I am joined by my co-host Toni Reitter. She is calling in from the Kenai Peninsula here in Alaska. Toni, how's it going today?
It's going really good. The wind is just now picking up, so that storm that the Iditarod has been dealing with all day as far as wind, I think it's starting to make its way to South Central. But other than that, it was a beautiful sunny day. My dog was very happy because he's more cat than dog and loves the sunshine. So, yeah, overall, not a bad Saturday.
Yeah, it is a beautiful day up this way, too. I spent the day in Anchorage meeting with clients, and it feels a little bit about like spring. I was out there in a light sweatshirt working with the dogs today, and that's always fun and a great time to be following Iditarod and living in Alaska. It's dirty and messy and mucky, but hey, that's what they call breakup, right?
Yeah, but they did say that Anchorage is supposed to get into single digits by next week. So I think you might jinx us if you keep saying that S word.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit about the standings. Currently, we have Brent Sass in first, chased down by Dallas Seavey, Aaron Burmeister, Jesse Holmes, and Richie Deal. And leading up the rear is Lisbeth Norris in 45th place, Yuka Honda in 44th, Kaylin Davis 43rd, and Apayak Reitter, I believe is how you say the name, in 42nd. And then right there behind those guys is Eric Kelly, one of the Musher profiles of the evening. And what I found interesting is I was talking to Toni off air, and we're looking at the distance between the first musher and the last musher at almost exactly 150 miles. And I want you guys just to imagine that as you're listening to our show, how far 150 miles is from here. And I would have to say for us, it's about halfway to Fairbanks. Where's 150 miles for you, Toni? Is that almost a homer, or homer then a little bit on their way back?
Well, Homer is only, I don't even think we're talking 100 miles from here. It's more like, I want to say maybe Chugiak or Wasilla from where we are. But Homer's a little shorter, so it's about 90 miles.
That is a very long way, and I'm trying to put it in perspective. For example, in Minnesota, it is about 150 miles from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, to Duluth, Minnesota. So imagine a group of dog teams spread out that far from Duluth to Minneapolis. That is a long way, to give some perspective, isn't it, Toni?
Yeah, it is, and you're looking at the logistics of the volunteers of those checkpoints. Cripple is where she's currently at. They're probably wanting to close down shop so that they can get further along the trail, especially this year where they were having a hard time filling those volunteer slots. Granted, this year with them being back in most of the village communities that are checkpoints, they have those volunteers back. And so I think they're not as hurting as if the checkpoints had been closed off like they were back in 2020 by this point in the race.
Right, and we've talked about it before, the Iditarod machine. The way that it typically works is the folks that are at that last checkpoint, as you mentioned, Toni, in Cripple, for those guys that are there in the back of the pack, pretty much they close up that checkpoint, and a lot of those guys move up the trail to another checkpoint. It may be the one, sort of hopscotching along or leapfrogging along their way down the trail. And that also includes the vets and the vet techs, which is our story of tonight. That seems like to be a very big story, especially after some news that broke after our air last night. We had 2 scratches. Let's see, how do we say her name again? Julie?
I believe it's Julie Annan, but I could be wrong because I've also heard Annan. So I'm not sure. I follow her and I've talked with her on social media, but that's never been something that's come up. So I'm not quite sure how to say her last name.
And as you know, Toni, and all of our listeners, I am absolutely terrible with names. I butchered your name on the last episode or 2 back. So I'm lucky I know my own name. So yeah, I'm pretty bad.
Thankfully, yours is easier to pronounce, and it's pretty much phonetically. So.
Right. But speaking of Julie, the press release said in the interest of the dogs, and that's key for what's coming up here in just a second. But as we suspected last night, she ended up turning around and heading back to McGrath and was there for a heck of a long time. So we can speculate, and that's all we can do here because obviously we do not have our finger on the pulse of Iditarod, but it was probably some type of stomach bug or mental issue with the dogs or potentially with the musher. Is that right?
Yeah, she was saying early on in the race that she had a few moments of, what am I doing out here? Which we hear a lot of, not just from the rookies, but also some of the toughened veterans. I think I've even heard someone like Jeff King or Mitch Stevie say, what am I doing here? So it's definitely something that each musher deals with at least once. And it was a rough go, especially for the back of the pack, getting there to McGrath. And so depending on what trail conditions were, we know that the trail wasn't that great from McGrath on. So, it could be that the musher was just like, screw it, I don't want to slog anymore. Or the dogs too could have had some trouble, and they weren't the only team having trouble finding the trail, the correct trail, and getting out of McGrath. So it's not surprising, but I am bummed because I know she was so excited about this race. So hopefully she's back. I've got my fingers crossed for her.
And she is running a second team for Nick Pettit's team. Is that right?
Nope, Jesse Holmes. Really close, though.
Yes.
They kind of remind me of each other.
Yeah, they have they have the same hairdo. That wild, crazy, curly
the
hair.
Wild man hair.
Yes. That's what I was thinking of. Yes, I met both Jesse and Julie one time at the Sheep Creek Lodge, and yes, now that I've said it, I definitely know. But remember, guys, we told you a while back that one of the best sources to follow these mushers on is on their individual Facebook pages. And often the handlers are quick to update, especially on scratches and stuff like that. But often after they get back into town and decompress and really have time to think about what happened on the trail, the mushers will give a really good response to whatever happened, positive or negative, out on the trail. And I think that that's probably one of the best sources, because often these are pretty canned press releases. They pretty much always say the same thing, in the best interest of the dogs. And almost everyone this year has said that, with the exception of the next musher that we want to talk about, Hugh Neff. He had to scratch in Ruby, and he was doing very well up to that point. He had really jumped his way up in the rankings as he made his way down the trail. And I have to put a disclaimer here. Hugh Neff and I are pretty good friends. We've been friends since pretty much the day I moved to Alaska, so I have absolutely no ill will towards Hugh. And again, we're definitely speculating here, but I know he has made a post, and a couple of other folks have made posts as well. So what is your take on what you've heard over the last 24 hours or so? Because this news dropped pretty much right after we hit the pause button on our episode last night before we uploaded. Is that right?
Pretty much. I mean, I think I beat you with the news before you could even give me the link to last night's episode. And it was just like, oh man, we did not see that coming. So what my understanding is, according to Hugh, from an interview that he did with Alaska Public Radio, he was in Ruby. He knew that his dogs had started having diarrhea. He says on that run into Ruby is when they started showing those signs. During the vet check, my understanding, this is not from Hugh, but this is from other tidbits that I've gleaned from, the vet did a check and they were concerned the dogs weren't eating. There were some other issues. I do believe, not just the diarrhea, but dehydration was a factor. And so Hugh says, according to his interview with Public Radio, Hugh says that he was given the option to either scratch or he would be disqualified. And he said that he would rather scratch. Mark Nordeman, the race marshal, he did give Hugh that opportunity. It was a little concerning personally for me to watch him jump so quickly. He was staying kind of further back in the pack, in the middle of the pack, and then suddenly he's third place, I think, into Ruby. And that's a little concerning, especially when we're hearing things like it's too warm. Other teams are having all of these issues. It's very easy for a team to get stressed in those circumstances, especially when they're running harder than what they're normally running. He's running Jim Lanier's dogs. And I think I even posted something like that saying, it's different because you're running a team that's used to being a Sunday driver team. Lanier's normally further in the pack. They kind of stay below anything that would get them into the qualified trophies or money or anything like that. And you can't really drive them like they're NASCAR dogs. You can't keep up with the Nick Pettits and the Dallas Seavies and the Brent Sasses necessarily with those dogs. He has been training them all season, so he should know the dogs and he should know the capabilities, but it sounds like there was definitely some discourse and some, not ill will necessarily, but I think there was definitely some discussion and some argument over whether or not to continue. And so he did make the right decision. But it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the days to come when he does get back home and he's able to talk more freely on social media.
And this is sort of Hugh's style, and he'll be the first to tell you that. Of course, he has a couple of Yukon Quest championships under his belt, and he's been doing Iditarods and other long-distance races, including the Finnmark, Slope It, and Iditarod for many years. I think he started in the early 2000s, so he's definitely not new to the race, but he is very quick out of the gate, and he'll often jump up into the rankings way up there. And I think his best finish ever was 5th place or something like that in Iditarod. So this is a common tactic for Hugh. But what I found interesting was sort of the forced hand, as you mentioned, whether you're going to scratch or we're going to DQ you, and what the repercussions of that are. I know right when we jumped on the air tonight, I'd ask you the question if you withdraw. If you're withdrawn, do you get a ride home, or if you scratch, do you have to pay your way? And I know you sent a message out to one of the Iditarod finishers who had also scratched. Did you hear back from her?
I did, and she said that nope, Iditarod makes sure that you get back, and they pay for you and your dogs to be returned from the trail. And then all of your return drop bags get returned to you too. Though I do know that some of her stuff never got back to her. They're still not sure where it went. But yeah, it doesn't. I know there were some fans, commenting saying that, it was unfair because forcing him to scratch was going to mean that it was coming out of his pocket. But that's simply not the case. Iditarod foots the bill to get you off the trail, because otherwise you got to keep the vets and the volunteers there until those dogs can leave. So no, the Iditarod's paying for him to go home, or at least get to Anchorage. I'm sure any other travel that he may need to take, that's on his dime. But as far as getting them back to the mainland, getting back to the road system, however you want to call it, that's on Iditarod.
And I read that same interview with the public media, Alaska Public Media, and he said that he was going to stay there in Ruby for a couple of days, collect his thoughts. I guess he has some friends there, probably a mutual friend of ours, Billy Hona, who is the Iditarod checker there at Ruby. Pretty nice guy, old Billy is, and he is full of Iditarod stories on his own part. But I'm sure he will stay there, take some time to decompress, and then work his way back. So if you remember, Toni, I think it was last night or the night before, we talked a little bit about this, where the race marshal forced another musher's hand, and I don't recall the name, and I don't think it's important here, but they got to a checkpoint, and he was refusing to scratch. He said, nope, I'm not going to do it. There's nothing wrong with my dogs. I'm going to continue down the trail. And I think at that point, it was the Rule 36, that competitive rule that we talked about last night. But eventually, the race marshal said, "Nope, we're gonna make sure that you are DQ'd, and that's it." So, does this sound like a very similar type conversation? Of course, we're not there; we're only speculating. But it sounds like that to me.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time that there's been disagreement between Hugh and race officials, as we know that he had a similar experience in the Yukon Quest not too long ago. He chose not to withdraw or scratch there, and then he ended up having a very difficult time. A dog passed away on his watch and that sort of thing, which led him to having to requalify for both the Quest and the Iditarod before they were going to let him run either of the 1,000-mile races. He managed to do that all before the pandemic, which is why he's in this race. So I think that also played a factor, not only in his decision to go ahead and scratch and not disqualify, because I'm sure there was talk about something like that if what Hugh is saying is correct. But at the same time, I'm sure that also factored into the vets and the race marshal and race judges in their decision to force that, because it wasn't truly forced on the Quest a few years ago, and the Musher got into more trouble than anybody, I think, truly expected at that point. So it could be that everyone erred on the side of caution, which I can't fault people for erring on the side of caution when we're talking about dogs. The dogs can't speak for themselves. We have to be the bigger person and take care of them. But it's definitely something that's interesting, and I think that's going to be the talk of the the end of the season. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to follow the story.
And that brings us right to our story of the day, and that's about the vets on the trail. You had mentioned when we first started talking about this scratch with Hugh that the dogs had diarrhea, possible dehydration, and they did the vet check there at Ruby. I believe that they do vet checks on at every checkpoint, if memory serves me. And then sometimes it's voluntary. For example, if you pull into a checkpoint and you have a dog that is injured, often a musher will say, "Hey, doc, can you come over and take a look at this dog? I think he has a sore shoulder or whatever." And the vets will do a check on them, and then they will make recommendations on whether you should rest or drop them or whatever. But almost always, in terms of dog care, it is the veterinarians who have pretty much the final say. If they say that you have to drop this dog, you're pretty much inclined to do so. There's not a lot of arguing on the trail because somebody has to have authority. And at that point, it's the veterinarians. And of course, they answer to the race marshal and so on and so forth. Of course, the race marshal is sort of the judge of the whole thing. He's the one that makes final determinations based on all of the circumstances. But at least on vet care, it's the vets that are making the rules. And I'm going to give my breakdown and, of course, share your own. But I have a quick question first. Is Stu Nelson still the head vet of Iditarod?
As far as I know, he's still there. I saw him not too long ago checking out dogs and his team at one of the checkpoints on the live feed. So I'm pretty sure Stu's still in charge.
So Stu Nelson has been around for a long time. He's the head vet of the Iditarod sled dog race, and then you have a whole bunch of volunteer vets that come from all over the country, and often these vets are not sled dog vets. They could be big animal vets, small animal vets, community vets, big city vets. They come from all over the place. And then some of them have been doing it for many years. Some of them are fresh out of the gate, and this is their first Iditarod, and they learn by trial by fire, just like all of the other checkers and volunteers and everybody else. And then they also have a team of vet techs, and I know that our friend Meredith Mapes has done some work with that. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if she's gone out and volunteered as a vet tech. She's definitely been out there on the trail as, I think, more checking in and doing comms. But she's definitely capable, I'm sure, of doing that should they need to. But I don't believe she's ever gone out as a veterinarian or a vet tech.
So in that scenario, you have very similar to the same vet hierarchy that you would see at your local vet that you take your dog to. The vet tech is sort of the nurse of the crew, where they do the triage and the cursory treatment, and then of course it goes right up the line, and then you have the veterinarians that take care of other issues, and that could be just checks on, that's pretty much their main job, is to make sure all the dogs are healthy and doing well. But if there is a illness or an injury, of course, they're fully capable of doing so on the trail, and I'm sure they've had to do that from time to time. But during a vet check, the vet or vet tech will give a full examination of the dog. They will check for injuries, lameness, muscle soreness, all of that, appetite, hydration. I know one of our Twitter followers asked, why do they pull up the fur? And that's often to check for hydration. So if you pull up a piece of the dog's fur and skin, if it pops back, they're pretty hydrated. If it sort of hangs there and is kind of floppy, that's a good sign of dehydration. You had mentioned with Hugh's team diarrhea. That is a pretty common occurrence on Iditarod, especially with the bugs that float through the teams. As we mentioned last night or the night before, that's pretty common. Diarrhea is a common problem on Iditarod, and I believe that there are even some legal medications that you can give dogs on the trail to inhibit some of these diarrhea issues. And I know that there's also some drugs out there that are diarrhea preventatives that are not legal, and I don't know the names of either one, but that is part of the vet care. And then the most important part of this is a dog that is dropped is under the care of the veterinarian, not until they leave the checkpoint, but until they get to the return dog yard, and then I believe it's either 24 or 48 hours after either they're dropped or the race is over. And I know this was a big deal back in, you talked about Musher X a few years ago, and that's where this came into play, didn't it?
A little bit, yeah. There was some question, and we'll never know really the full story of that because of all of the drama that was found out afterwards. That was after the 2017 Iditarod, and so the question became with the doping allegation and the amount that was in the dogs. The question became, when did these dogs have that much, when did they get dosed? And the amount that they had in them and their energy level and everything suggested it was after they finished and the musher signed off the trail, which would then probably mean that the dogs got dosed after they were in that dog lot, which means they were allowed to have the drug that was in their system. It's not a completely banned substance. You're just not allowed to use it while you're racing. Well, they weren't racing anymore. So that was kind of the question and the argument. And we really don't know the whole story of that. And I have my own personal opinions on that, but yeah, no, it's one of those things where the vets take it very, very seriously. If you're part of the return dog program at all, it's one of the most important jobs I personally feel in the Iditarod, because you're in charge of their well-being, their health care, and everything while their musher is not there. So that's a huge responsibility.
And a couple other quick notes. Every musher carries a little notebook. I believe it's yellow, at least it has been in the past, sort of like a steno notebook. And all of that has the dogs that are on the trail, the dog numbers, and if they're dropped, and all of that. That's sort of a card that they show the vets when they pull into the checkpoints. And then lastly, is the award that is offered to the vets. What is it called? The golden clipboard or something like that? I don't remember the name.
Golden clipboard, yeah. Golden clipboard. Is
that for the vet or the vet tech?
It is. I believe it's given out. I believe it's voted by the mushers. And then, of course, the vets also reciprocate, and they choose out of, I believe it's the top 20, a musher that wins their humanitarian award, which I believe in Iditarod is the Leonard Seppala Award. And that is for the musher who gives the best dog care. And I believe Allie Zirkle has the record number of wins on that. I'd have to double check to see how many it was, but it's something like 6 or 8 times that she's won. And then I think the next one that would have as many would be Mark Boozer. And they just, again, that's something that the vets, they're paying attention from checkpoint to checkpoint to make sure that the dogs are keeping weight, making sure that they're eating, they're hydrated, they're not in any pain. It's impressive that they can keep all of those dogs and those mushers organized.
Yep, and often, a couple other things that I just thought of, often it's the vets or the vet techs that are also doing human care on the trail as well. So if a person has an injury of any type, they are typically the first responders on the trail. Of course, we have all sorts of other medical personnel out there, but it's almost always one of the first people you see when you pull into the checkpoint. And we can maybe talk about checkpoint routine in a different show, but one of the first people that you come in contact with is the vet team, and they're right there at most checkpoints, and it's a 24-hour a day job. It doesn't matter if you're coming in at 6 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning. Somebody from that vet team is there, and also they also leapfrog down the trail. So a vet that starts off early in the race at the first few checkpoints, what may be mid-race along the trail, and of course may end up in Nome at the end of the race, and sort of see all of the dogs as they're working their way down. So that's not uncommon as well. Did we miss anything on the vet system in our story for tonight?
I don't think so. I did reach out to one of the vets that I know. She is a vet that has not only done Iditarod, but the Tasmania 200, and I think the Willow 300, and several other races. And just, I know people sit there and, you know, you see Brent and Dallas, and they're only spending like 5 minutes in a checkpoint and then they're gone. How do you check all of those dogs? And it really comes down to kind of a triage idea. And she said, it's important to do all of the things that, you know, they check for. But when teams are moving in and out at rapid succession, we have to focus on priorities. And the acronym vets use is called HAL, like left. And it's how they evaluate. They evaluate hydration and heart, rate and rhythm, attitude and appetite. W is for weight, their body weight. And then L is for their lungs. And so you'll see a lot if you've got the video on Insight or if you're watching the news coverage, you'll see all of the vets. They've all got their stethoscopes out and they're all checking their lungs. They're checking mainly to hear any crackling in the lungs because there's a good chance that, you know, in certain kind of conditions, dogs can develop kind of a doggy walking pneumonia. And that used to be very prevalent back in the 80s and 90s. It's not so much anymore because of the studies done, the research done, most of it headed up by Dr. Stu Nelson, who I was there the first year that Iditarod had no incidents where a dog passed either on the trail or after. And I was in the room when Stu announced that to everyone there. It was for the volunteer appreciation, and just the emotion and the excitement that he and his team had was really, really inspiring. You know, that's been the goal since day one, and we're there more than we're not now, and that's in large part due to the veterinary care and research that the race has done over the decades.
Last question for you on the vet side of things. I know that you know quite a bit about the volunteering. Is that a pretty difficult job to get? Do you know that? I'm sure a lot of these guys have been around a long time, but again, you could apply if there's a spot open and go for it. And do you know if there's a big time vetting procedure, no pun intended there, to allow somebody in? I mean, could somebody from New York City have just as much of a chance as, you know, a veterinarian in rural Alaska?
You know, there used to be, I don't know if there's still a team that comes from Australia, probably not with all the travel restrictions they have, but I met a crew over 10 years ago, and they come up every year from Australia. So, I don't know if it's one of those that you have to know somebody, but I'm sure they're always looking for veterinarians to come up and help out, and vet techs, you know, especially when there are big number years of entries, not so much this year, but in other years when we have 70 or 80 teams. I think more hands on deck, the better.
Right, for sure. So let's jump over to our musher of the day. And we are running long, so for folks that are listening, we appreciate you sticking with us. Let's talk about Matt Faler. As I mentioned yesterday when we picked him, they're all running together now. I think this is our 8th or 9th day here on the show. But Matt Faler, he's one of our local mushers. He runs on the same trail system as we do here on the Hessler Norris trail system, and he puts in a heck of a lot of work on our trails. And for folks that don't know much about the process of mushing, often it's as much as chores as it is running the dogs. And often Matt and his handler crew will spend hour upon hour upon hour out grooming the trails for us. And then after he puts his snow machine away, he will hook up his dog team and go. But he does something different with his snow machine that a lot of mushers do not do. He will hook up a huge string of dogs, maybe 12, 14, 16, or 18 dogs to the front of his snow machine. And then he will pull the trail drag to pack down the trail behind the snow machine. So it's this train length contraption traveling down the trail while he is grooming the trail. So I guess he's killing two birds with one stone, as they say. But Matt, what a heck of a nice guy. He's lived on this side of the highway for quite a while. I think he moved over here after he moved on from Martin Booser's kennel, and I'm sure you'll probably mention some of this in your information, but I believe he got his start there. He ran one of the puppy teams or B teams for Martin several years ago and finished Iditarod with that, and then, of course, branched out on his own and bought, I believe, Eggo Ellis's place, if memory serves me. And folks in the sprint mushing world know who that guy is. He's sort of the king or godfather of sprint mushing. Anybody mentions his name in the sprint world, they know exactly who that is. But anyway, back to Matt. Heck of a nice guy. He is my wife, Michelle's, who's sitting here listening to us on the headphone. That was her dark horse for the year. She always cheers on Matt and hope that he does very well. And he's one of those quiet contenders. He's always up there in the money. He always does very well. And I still think in the next few years he will have his own championship. And so that's sort of my take on Matt. What do you know about him?
Well, he did win the Cusco 300. He kind of broke up the Pete Kaiser reign there a few years ago, and he is a member of this club with the Cusco winners of Richie Deal and Pete Kaiser. They call themselves the three Cusco champs, and then they also added Your Life's a Folsom, who has not won the Cusco, and so it's now the three Cusco champs and Your, which I thought was the funniest thing that came out of this year's Cusco 300 race. So I digress. You're right. He learned from one of the best dog mushers in Iditarod history, Martin Booser, 4-time Iditarod champion. He kind of reminds me of Martin in persona, just like you said, a little quieter. But he kind of has that same energy when it comes to talking dogs. He used to call himself the 17th dog because he used to run 16 dogs in Iditarod, and that was a Seahawks, I think, reference, being the 17th dog, which is not cool for the 49ers fans to even say, but we'll give it to him. Now he and his wife Liz Faler, who, if you're watching Iditarod Insider, she's one of the talking heads on there. But they run Alaskan Husky Adventures, and they do tours out of their kennel and that sort of thing. And I think we talked about him last year. I seem to recall saying that their wedding was just one of those fairy tale Alaska weddings. They drove off in their just married dog sled with their dogs pulling them around the yard. So just one of those really nice guys that, you're always pulling for. And last year he ran on a bad hip. He got off the Iditarod trail and got hip surgery. So that he's even out there kicking butt and placing hopefully in the money in the next couple of days is incredible to me, and just shows what an athlete he is himself, not just his dog.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his standings right now. He started mushing in 2012, and it looks like he's ran every year since. His best finish is 13th in 2018, and his worst finish was in 2017. So a heck of an improvement there. I don't know if he got most improved musher or not, but he was in 2016 was one back. He was 61st. So he did very well in 2018. And then, of course, COVID hit and all of that. But otherwise, he has been running for pretty much every year since he started. In 2021, he got the Sportsmanship Award, and he did get Most Improved Musher in 2018. And in 2016, the Musher's Choice Award. So he's a very well-liked musher by both mushers and fans alike. And you're right, the story with him and his wife, and she was, at the time, she was with the news station that reported on Iditarod. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how they met. She was the one that got chosen to go out on the trail, and my understanding was she wasn't all that excited other than it was the Iditarod, and so every Alaskan journalist wants that coverage at least once in their career, but she wasn't like overly enthused about dogs or anything. And I guess she met him at one of the checkpoints. We've heard this story many times before. She met him at one of the checkpoints, and they were just apparently smitten with each other, and they've been with each other pretty much ever since.
And it's my understanding, and I might be misthinking here, but she is also in the process of qualifying for Iditarod. I know she's ran a race or two.
She's run a couple of races. I don't know if she's necessarily thinking that she's going to run or not. I haven't heard her actually commit to that. But it seems like the logical choice that at some point she's going to do that.
And you said that she is the reporter for The Insider. She is no longer working for the news. Is that right?
Yeah, no. When KTUU bought out KTVA, which was where she worked, I don't know if she just didn't get added to the roster or if she decided to look for other employment. But yeah, she's not with the official news source of Iditarod for Alaska anymore, which is kind of a bummer because I think she's one of the best ones.
Very good. So it is your turn to pick for tomorrow. Who is it?
Okay, well, since we're on the subject of husband and wife teams, I'm going to suggest that we talk about both Dieters that are on the trail, Katie Jo and Jeff. They're running together, which was not the original plan. She was supposed to run the B team while he ran the A team, but he's got some sickness going on in his dogs, so he decided to hang back and start running with her. So I'd kind of like to give a shout out to both of them. So Jeff and Katie Jo.
Oh, so we're going to do a double musher of the day tomorrow.
I am, because I figure we're talking about the same kennel. We should be able to get some information on both of them.
Very good. That sounds good to talk about. Anything else that we missed before we go tonight?
Well, I was just giving a quick look to the GPS when we were talking about Matthew to see how he was doing, and I noticed that Dallas Seavey, I'm not sure if he's cut his rest short, but he was resting on the trail there between Caltag and Unalakleet, and he's on the move now, and Brent Sass is still resting on the trail. So I don't know if this is Dallas making his move, but I think tonight's going to be a little bit interesting to watch how the race unfolds.
And just a quick update on that. Remember, guys, we had said that it's required that you take a 24-hour rest and 2 8-hour rests. The second 8-hour rest is in White Mountain, which is the last major checkpoint of the race. And then you have to take an 8-hour rest on the Yukon River. And it looks like just about everyone is claimed that is at that point right now, all the way up to, at least on my standings, up to 28th place is either taking it or has taken that 8-hour rest. So that is a mandatory stop. And remember, everybody has to do that. So if a person is at one point in the standings, and then of course they declare their 8 hours, and then somebody leapfrogs them and they have not taken that 8 hours, that's another part of Iditarod math, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's definitely interesting. We've seen a little bit of leapfrogging, but for the most part, they've all kind of stayed how they were once they got into Ruby. There's not been a lot of jostling for position just yet, except for Aaron Burmeister did just leave Caltag not long ago, so he's now currently running in third.
Okay, last thing here, since we're so far over. You had mentioned right when we started where Brent was in terms of miles. Can you pull that up for me on the GPS?
Yep, I've got him right here.
And how far is he into the race?
He is at mile 676, and I don't think that's Old Woman Cabin. I'm not sure, but it is one of the resting spots that we see a lot of teams go into. So he's got about 299, according to the GPS, 299 miles to go.
So he's almost to that last third. So when do you think we'll see a winner? Alex and I usually try to figure that out about now. We usually do it Saturday or Sunday night. Do you think it will be sometime, I guess that would be Wednesday morning, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, or do you think it'll be sometime either earlier or after that?
I'm gonna hedge and say probably late Tuesday evening, early Wednesday. Not sure how this windstorm that's supposedly hitting the coast today and I think part of tomorrow is going to affect the teams and the trail. So I'm going to say that we're going to go with the traditional finish of late Tuesday, early Wednesday.
I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to say 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. And Toni, it's only been one time in all of the years that we have done this, Alex and I, where we were on the air. And we used to do our show live when I would host it at the radio station. And we were on the air. I believe it was Dallas. I don't remember exactly for sure. But he was, whoever it was, I think it was Dallas. I think Michelle's saying so. And we kept the show going till he finished. And it was, I don't know, we were on at 8 o'clock or whatever it was. And we stayed on till 9 or 9:30 while he finished. So in 11 years, we have never been on the air or been talking when somebody finished. So maybe this year.
Only if Dallas or Brent, whoever it ends up being. Dallas is notorious for making me wake up at like 2 a.m. to watch the finish. As long as it's not one of those 2 a.m. finishes, I don't mind being on air when it happens.
Very good. All right. So with that, guys, please leave us a review. I told you how to do it at the beginning of the show. It will really help us out in our rankings. We've had a heck of a lot of folks downloading and listening, and I'll give you guys some numbers tomorrow. It's pretty impressive. Each year we go up just a little bit, and I think that that's cool that we have so many fans all over the world. So on behalf of my co-host and myself, we will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.
So earlier, you learned about First Paw Coffee Company. Now I'm going to tell you about its Trailbreaker Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Trailbreaker Blend is inspired by our love of the Northern Lights, frosty paws, and sled dog trails. How cool is that? The Trailbreaker Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It's a medium dark roast from Central and South America, highlighting flavors of brown sugar, hazelnut, and plum. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.